Everyone knows, thank you very much. This past Monday, Chamishas B'Shvat, we finished the 45th cycle of learning the Rambam. Those that learn 3 chapters a day, as well as those that do Sefer HaMitzvahs. And yesterday we began the 46th cycle. So, and it's Hashgacha Pratis that it's also connected with this week's Sedra, because the beginning of the new cycle, the first mitzvah is Anechi Hashem Elokecha, to know that there is a God, and that is that's this week's Sedra, Anechi Hashem Elokecha, Naseres HaDibur. So I'm just going to read out the last halacha in the Rambam. As everyone knows, the last section of the Rambam is Hilchot Malachim, the laws of kings, and it's 12 chapters. This Hilchot Malachim, and the last 2 chapters are dedicated to the laws of the king that's most pertinent to us, which is Mashiach. So the last 2 chapters are the laws of Mashiach. The first chapter is more about how to identify Mashiach and where the sources in the written law for the concept of the coming of Mashiach. And in the last chapter, he talks about what things will be like, what life will be like in the world of Mashiach. And the very last halacha is Uba-Oisei Hazman. That time of Mashiach, there won't be any hunger, there won't be any wars, there won't be any jealousy, there won't be any competition. Why won't there be any of these things? Because what causes hunger is the lack of food. What causes war is when people have issues with each other, and somebody wants what somebody else has to the extent that they go and they wage war with them. What causes jealousy and competition is when I feel that I don't have what I need, and somebody else has it, and therefore I'm jealous of them, and therefore I'm competitive with them. But in the time of Mashiach, that won't be an issue, because there'll be an abundance of goodness in the world. So there'll be plenty of everything that anybody desires, there'll be plenty of it. So there's not going to be there's not going to be any hunger, because people will have plenty of food. There's not going to be any wars, because whatever people are interested in, they'll have plenty of. There won't be any jealousy or competition, because there'll be an abundance of goodness in the world. And all delicacies will be as available as dust. Now, the simple pshat mitzuyin ka'afar is available as dust. But there's also a deeper meaning, they'll be as important as dust. People will be interested in all the luxuries and all the delicacies as much as they're interested in dust. Because people will be interested only in connecting with Hashem. So anything which is outside of connecting with Hashem will be worthless. Nobody interested. It won't be a valuable commodity. DUST, dust. It'll be like dust. So the simple meaning is, will be as plentiful as dust. Just like there's no shortage of dust in the world, there'll be no shortage of all the things that people are interested in, the things that people desire. But taking it a step further, they'll be as significant as dust, because nobody will be interested in them. So all the things that people today make a big deal out of won't be meaningful, because people will realize that the values that people will live by will lead them to much more important things. That is a relationship with Hashem. The engagement of the entire world, the involvement of the entire world will be only the knowledge of Hashem, to know Hashem. People are going to want to know Hashem better and better and better. Therefore, people of Israel will be extremely wise. They will know concealed things, they'll know hidden things. They will comprehend the knowledge of their Creator in accordance with the capacity of man. Shanemar, as the Pasuk says in Yeshaya, when Yeshaya talks about his prophecy of what the world will be like when Mashiach comes, he says, Ki mola ha'aretz de'es Hashem, that the world will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem, kamayim layam mechasim, like the waters cover the sea. And I've mentioned, I think on previous occasions, that the name of Hashem that's used in this pasuk, Ki mola ha'aretz de'es Hashem, kamayim layam mechasim, is the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, Havayim. As well as at the beginning of the Rambam, the opening words of the Rambam in the first halacha of Hilchos Yesodei HaTorah, the laws of the foundations of the Torah, the most fundamental concepts in the Torah, The opening words of the Rambam are Yisoid HaYisoidos Ve'amud HaChachmos, that the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all wisdoms is Leida Sheyesh Sham Motzi Rishon, to know that there is a first existence. Get back to that in a minute, but the words Yisoid HaYisoidos Ve'amud HaChachmos, the pillar of all, the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all wisdoms, is a Rashi Tevis, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yisoid begins with a Yud, HaYisoidos begins with a Hey, Ve'amud begins with a Vav, HaChachmos begins with a Hey. So both at the conclusion of the Rambam Mishnah Torah, you have the name Havaya, Kimola Haaretz Deis Havaya Kamayim Le'yam Lechasim, that the world will be filled with the knowledge of the Almighty, like the waters cover the sea. He uses the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. And in the very beginning of the Rambam, where it says Yisoid HaYisoidos Ve'amud HaChachmos Leida Sheyesh Motzi Rishon, the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all wisdoms is to know that there is a first existence. Again, you have the name, the acronym of the name Havaya Yud Kei Vav Kei, Yisoid HaYisoidos Ve'amud HaChachmos. Why is there an emphasis on the name Havaya in the book of the Rambam, both at the end and the beginning? So we explained that we know that when there's disagreements in Torah, when there's more than one opinion, we don't say that one is right and one is wrong. We say, Elu va'elu divrei Elokim chayim. Both are the words of the living God. They're both Torah. They're both the word of Hashem. The only thing is, you have to know which you have to actually do in practice. You have to follow the halacha in practice. But they're not a waste of time. They're the wisdom of Hashem, just as if there's a disagreement, the Shammai and Basil, like we're just coming from the 15th of Shvat, which we keep as the New Year for trees, but that's only according to one opinion. There's another opinion in the Mishnah, Beis Shammai, that says that the first of Shvat is the New Year for trees. Who's right? They're both right. They're both the word of Hashem. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. In halacha, you can only follow one. So the halacha, when there's machlekes Beis Shammai and Basil, the halacha is like Basil. Therefore, we keep the New Year for trees on the 15th of Shvat.
You just said that they're wrong.
They're both right, but you can only do one. So they're both right, and they're both holy, and they're both godly. But at the end of the day, there is the halacha, which the halacha is only one. So this is the difference between when we talk about how both are right, we use the expression elu va'elu, these and these, divrei Elokim chayim, are words of the living God. But the name of Hashem that we use in that conversation is Elokim. Elokim is conjugated in plural, and it's an aspect of godliness that leaves room for plurality. There could be more than one opinion, and that's valid, because Elokim is Lashon Rabbi, and that refers to the concept that there's room in godliness, just like in Atzilus, there's 10 spheres. There's the right column, the column of Chesed. There's the left column, the column of Gvura. There's the center column, the column of Tiferes. So there's validity in all approaches. From the perspective of divine kindness, you reach one conclusion. From the perspective of divine severity, you reach another conclusion. They're all valid within the divine. But there you have to use the name of Hashem that represents plurality, which is Elokim. Elokim finishes with a Yud Mem, like we know in Hebrew grammar, that a word that is plural finishes with Yud Mem. And many times in conjugation, we even use plural the adjectives to describe Elokim Kedoshim. But the name Yud Kei Vav Kei is singular. And that represents the essence of Hashem that transcends all plurality, that transcends the possibility for things going in more than one direction. And that's why when we talk about halacha, we say Dvar Havaya zu halacha. The word of Havaya is the halacha. Or as it says in Tanakh, when Shaul HaMelech was told about all the virtues of David, every virtue that he was told, he said, Yonasan b'ni kamaisai, the Gemara says. My son Yonasan also has that virtue. When he was told to follow the final line, B'Hashem imay, B'Havaya imay, Shalacha kamaisai b'chol makim, that Havaya is with him, which means that in every halachic argument, the halacha ends up being like him. There, he couldn't match that one. So halacha is associated with Havaya. And since halacha is associated with Havaya, Var Havaya zu halacha, and the Rambam Sefer is a Sefer of halacha. That's what's unique about the Rambam Sefer. That's how it differs from the Talmud. The Talmud is an incredible book, but it brings all the different opinions and all the different reasons and all the different questions and suggestions and refutations, while the Rambam goes straight to the halacha. He just brings the halacha, he goes through the entire Torah and focuses on the halacha. So that's why the Sefer of the Rambam, which is a Sefer of halacha, is very strongly connected with The name Yud Kei Vavke. So at the end of the Rambam, you have Mala Haaretz Deis Havaya Kamayim L'Yom Chasim, and at the very beginning, you have Yesod HaYesodis V'Amud HaChachmos, which is an acronym of Rosh Tevus of Havaya. And what is the foundation of foundations in the pillar of wisdoms? So that is Leida Sheyesha Matzi Rishon, to know that there is a first existence. V'hu Mamtzi Kol Nimtza, and that first existence is responsible for bringing all beings into existence. So everything exists only because it's created by the first existence, namely the Almighty. Everything that exists from heaven to earth and everything in between have come into existence only from the truth of his existence. And what does it mean from the truth of his existence? What would be lacking if he would have said that everything that exists because of him, comes from him? Why does he say from the truth of his existence? So really, this is a very, very fundamental concept, that there's a major difference between Hashem's existence and the existence of all other beings. And I'll illustrate it with the following. I think the following scenario illustrates it somewhat. Let's say you're taking a child for a walk in the park, and you come across a stream, and you say to the child, "Who created the stream?" And of course, the answer is Hashem. Then you come across a squirrel. Who created the squirrel? Hashem. And then you come across a tree. Who created the tree? Hashem. Who created the cat? Hashem. Who created the grass? Hashem. Right? It's very simple. It's one answer for all the questions. Right? Then the child turns around to you and asks a very innocent question. Who created Hashem? Oh, now let me do that. Now let me ask that question. Why not? The same logic that suggests that whatever you come across, someone must have created, and therefore it's a valid question to ask who created it. So isn't it a valid question to ask who created Hashem?
I had that from the
Yeah, it's natural. It means the child is thinking, right? So what's the answer? The answer is very simple. The answer is that it's logical, perfectly logical to understand that all of existence fits into two types of existence, two categories of existence, which is referred to by the Chokrim, by the Jewish philosophers, as Mechuyev HaMetzias and Efsher HaMetzias. Mechuyev HaMetzias means an absolute existence, and Efsher HaMetzias means a possible existence. Let me explain. This glass is here on the table. Why is it here on the table? Obviously, because somebody put it here. If nobody would have put it here, it wouldn't have been here. So that's a possible existence. It could have been here, could not have been here. It could have existed. Possible. P-O-S-S-I. Excuse me for my American accent. Yeah? So it could not have existed. A glazier made it so it exists. It could not have been on the table. Somebody put it on the table, so it's here. Right? So that's a possible existence. The same is true for every other thing that we see. It could have been, it could not have been. So it's a possible existence. Anything that's a possible existence logically begs the question, who put it there? Who made it? There were two possibilities. It could have been or it could not have been. So obviously there must be an answer. Who made it? Why is it there? But then we come across the concept of definite existence, absolute existence. What's an example of an absolute existence that we can understand in our minds? So I'll give you a simple example, but I'll preface it by saying that the example is not correct. And I'll explain in a minute why it's not correct. But I'll use it just to help us understand. The principle, the logical equation, that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Since when does 2 and 2 equal 4? As of which date? As of which act of parliament did 2 and 2 start equaling 4? I think the obvious answer is, it just does. It doesn't need any act of parliament or any other event to make it start equaling 4. It just is. It always was. It always will be. It cannot be any other way. So the concept that 2 plus 2 equals 4 is not a concept that requires someone to make it that way. Or another example, the logical equation that the Father precedes the Son. Ever since when do fathers precede sons? That's just the way it is. Can't be any other way. So it doesn't necessarily, logically speaking, it doesn't need anyone to create it. It just is. Now, I said before that the truth is it's not so. Because we mentioned many times in the Shiur that in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you had 10 amas from the wall of the Kodesh HaKadoshim to the Ark, 10 amas from the other wall to the Ark, 2.5 amas to Aaron, and altogether 20 amas. So 10 and 10 and 2.5 equal 20, which defy the rules of logic. So the rules of logic are also a creation, and Hashem can choose to create it otherwise. But in our minds, logically, something which is an absolute rule of logic, it just is, right? Who is the only true just is? The only true just is, the only true definite existence, absolute existence, always was, always will be, and is everywhere at all times. And it is absolute, is Hashem. Everything else is possible. Could be like this, could be like that. So all existences from heaven to earth and everything in between, which means all possible existence, was brought into being by one absolute existence. And who's that absolute existence? Hashem. So therefore, logically, the squirrel who is here and not there, today and not yesterday, the stream who is here and not there, the tree, the grass, the cow, everything else begs the question, logically, who created it? Where did it come from? While Hashem, who is the ultimate existence, the absolute existence, the definite existence, always was, always will be, and is everywhere, and there isn't the possibility of him not being. He didn't need anybody to start him off. He just is. That's called a mechuyev hametzius, an absolute existence. That's called true existence. Truth is something which is consistent in every form and fashion, consistent in time, consistent in space, consistent in every concept. There is no realm in which Hashem doesn't exist. He's absolute. So therefore, logically speaking, his existence is of a totally different nature than any other existence. And therefore, he is called Amitas Himotzei, the true existence. And from the truth of his existence emanate all other existence. Does that make sense?
So in the same concept, if 2 plus 2 is 4, 2 plus 2 could also be 22.
That's not 2 plus 2, that's 2 next to it. 2. What I'm saying is that any 2 objects put next to another 2 objects will equal 4 objects. I'm not talking about the signs that you're making. Me amitas himotzoi nimtzeu kol hanimtzoi. From the truth of his existence, all existences have been brought into being.
How do you explain it to the child?
How do you explain it to a child? Very good question. I think the answer is that there are things that need to be brought into existence in order to exist, and there are certain things that exist in essence. I'll give you another analogy for this that maybe you bring it a little closer to home. Let's say you're going on a holiday to Antarctica, the coldest planet on Earth, yeah, and it's freezing. It's freezing, and you go into a building, and it's very warm, and you say, "Why is it so warm in this building?" The answer is because this building is built with fantastic insulation, and it has a heating system par excellence, and therefore it's comfortable, nice and warm. Then you walk outside again, and it's freezing again. You ask, "Why is it freezing over here?" Which one of those questions is valid? Why is it warm is a valid question. Because it's freezing in Antarctica. It's naturally freezing, right? So if it's naturally freezing and something happens different from the natural, from the obvious, from the given, you ask, why is it? Right? Outside it's freezing. Why is it warm in here? You need an answer. But when you go outside and it's freezing, it just is. That's the natural state of things, right? So that doesn't require a question, why is it? Of course, you're scientific. You want to figure out why in this curve of the globe is it colder than anywhere else. And I'm talking about when you're living in Antarctica, you're expecting it to be freezing. And when it's not freezing, that's something which begs the question, what happened over here? Who heated up this house? How did it become so warm here? Right? But when you're back to the natural state of things, you don't ask, how did it happen? That's just the way it is. So I'm saying is that logically, it makes sense, even to a child, that there's two types of existence. There's existence, which is a chiddush. Yeah, that's interesting. Where did that come from? And there's existence, which is given, just the way it is. So Hashem is a given existence, a true existence, an absolute existence. His existence is. It always was, it always will be. It's everywhere at all times, in all circumstances, in all dimensions, and in all aspects. And from him were created all other beings that are not absolute.
When I had this reading for the 4-year-old, this question, who created Hashem? Because in a chain, it's just Hashem made, well, who made Hashem? He came to the conclusion that Hashem made himself.
Which is another way of saying, he just is. So he, in other words, his existence demands itself. It brings itself into existence. It's an obvious existence. Just like 2 and 2 is 4, in our minds brings itself into existence.
Before it works his way around this.
Brilliant.
This stuff is just becoming the system law.
You should have a lot of atzlacha. You should have a lot of nachas, gesundheit, together with your husband.
But it was an interesting conversation at the time.
100%. Then, yes.
If a child orphans, how would they look at Hashem? Are you telling them that it's just...
So the fact itself, yeah, the question was, so how would you, as a child or any person, look at Hashem? So I think I understand the question, perhaps a little bit.
I can see you.
I understand what you're asking. So, because I exist only, my body exists only on a physical level, and not on another dimension, because it exists only here, and doesn't exist over here, because it has color and shape, which limits it, therefore, your physical eye can see it. But when you're dealing with something which transcends color and shape, transcends space, transcends time, so obviously, it's not going to have those limitations that are going to allow for your physical eye to connect with it, because it's beyond that. It's greater than that. And that's why something which is finite, in our finite realm, we can engage with it through physical vision, and something which is infinite and transcends space and time and shape and color and everything else that you want to describe something with is invisible, because it's greater than being visible. Okay? Then the Rambam says in the second halakha, "V'im yala al hadas shehu ein emotzi," and if it will enter into your mind, unless if you'll think perhaps he doesn't exist, so ein davar acher yachal lehimatzi, then nothing else could exist. Being that everything exists only because he brought it into existence. So if you would entertain in your mind the possibility of him not existing, then you might as well include in that suggestion that nothing exists. Because the only way that anything can exist is if he creates it. So if he doesn't exist, then nothing exists. Yeah, and the question that Mefarshim struggle with is, what has the Rambam brought in the second halacha that he hasn't said in the first halacha? He already said that all existences come from the truth of his existence. So if all existence come from the truth of his existence, then obviously, if he didn't exist, nothing would exist. Because everything comes from the truth of his existence. Why waste the ink and the paper to say, if he didn't exist, nothing would exist? And there are various answers given to this question. One of the answers is, a very interesting one, especially for us learning Tanya, is that it's possible that what the Rambam intended to say over here is that if it would enter your mind that he doesn't exist in something, in other words, this glass exists. Why does this glass exist? Because there's a divine creative energy that's creating it every second from nothing to something. What if that divine creating energy would not continue to be present in this glass? It would be, but not in this glass. It wouldn't manifest itself in the creation of this glass. It wouldn't manifest itself in the creation of any other existence. He would just continue to exist on his own, but not express himself in the creation of this object and that object and the other object. So then nothing would exist, because everything exists only because Hashem and his creative energy continues to recreate everything from nothing to something. And therefore everything's true existence is his creative energy. And if that creative energy would cease to engage in creating, then nothing would exist. And that brings out the fact that the true existence of everything is Hashem's creative energy, which is one with Hashem himself. And therefore, there is nothing else except Hashem. And therefore, again, this week said, when Yidden stood in front of Matan Torah, and the pasuk describes the experience of Matan Torah, Ata har Eisol Odas. This is a pasuk in Parshas after when it talks about the second set of Sadibras as they appear in Parshas V'Aschanan. But it describes the experience that Yidden had in this week's Seder when they received the Torah. It says, Ata har Eisol Odas, you were shown to know, to understand, Hashem hu Halikim, that the Almighty is God. Ein oid milvadei, there's nothing else except Him. Which brings us to the second mitzvah. There's the mitzvah, the second positive mitzvah. The first positive mitzvah is to know that there is a God. And the second positive mitzvah is Hashem Echad, to know that Hashem is one. Hashem is one and only, and there's nothing else besides Him. So according to this interpretation of the second halacha of the Rambam, this is basically what the Rambam is teaching us in the second halacha, that if godliness did not exist within any creation, that creation would not exist. Because the only way that anything exists is because of Hashem's creative energy that makes it exist. And if for one moment that creative energy would depart, it wouldn't exist. So if it would enter your mind that He doesn't exist in creation, then creation wouldn't exist. Because the only way that creation can exist is because Hashem's creative energy is continuously present in it and creating it. Okay. We're going to move on to Tanya. Tanya, we're in the middle of chapter 4, Perek Dalet. We are on page 16, both on the top of the page and the bottom of the page. 16. So we spoke about how is it possible that an infinite God, we said that God and His wisdom are one, and therefore the Torah is one with Hashem. And God and His will are one, and therefore the mitzvahs are one with Hashem. How is it possible that an infinite God is manifest in a finite idea or in a finite act? The act of doing a mitzvah, fulfilling Hashem's will, is a finite act. In fact, most mitzvahs have shiurim. If it's a kazayis of matzah, you fulfill the mitzvah. If it's less than a kazayis, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. So how could you say that the essence of God, which is infinite, should be expressed in something so finite and so limited? Both when it comes to Torah, Torah is something that is an understanding that can be comprehended by the human mind. If it can be comprehended by the human mind, it's obviously finite, because the human mind is finite. And to say that this finite comprehension, in this finite concept that the Torah teaches, in that dwells the essence of Hashem, how does the essence of Hashem, who is infinite, dwell in something finite? Or by the same token, when you talk about a mitzvah being the will of Hashem, and Hashem and His will are one, how could you say that something finite, like a finite act, which Hashem requires of us to do, is a mitzvah which is the will of Hashem, who is infinite? And being that He is infinite, His will is infinite. If He is infinite, His wisdom is infinite. So how could it be His infinite wisdom in a finite concept in Torah, or a finite act that the mitzvah requires us to do? So on this we answered last week. We brought the Maimer Chazal, b'makom shatamoitze gdulasei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sham atamoitze ambesalus. And where you find the greatness of the Almighty, that's where you find His humility. Meaning that if someone is a little bit great, he can lower himself a little bit. If someone is greater, he can lower himself more. If someone is extremely great, I gave an example in the previous year, I think, about a teacher. Let's say you have an average teacher can teach a bright student. A good teacher can teach even a weak student. A brilliant teacher can teach even a very, very student that is extremely limited. And the greater the teacher, the more the teacher can lower themselves to be able to give out what they're offering in a very contracted form, in a very contracted manner. So when you're talking about an Almighty who is absolutely infinite, so His capacity for making Himself finite or presenting Himself within the finite is infinite. He's infinitely capable of contracting himself. He's infinitely capable of diminishing himself. And therefore, it's not a wonder when a concept which the human mind can comprehend is the wisdom of Hashem and one with Hashem himself. So when you learn a halacha in Shulchan Aruch, a piece of Gemara, a Mishnah Mishnayos, and it's telling you a statement which doesn't sound like the world is, you look at the Aseres HaDibros. The Aseres HaDibros, right? This is the great divine revelation. It's once in history, divine revelation. So you would expect to hear something that's mind-boggling, that's really, really going to take the world in what does Hashem say? He said simple things. He said, I'm the Lord your God, don't have any gods besides me, don't take my name in vain, rest on the seventh day, honor your parents, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't covet. I mean, these are all simple things. But because he is infinite, he can put his infinite existence into anything, as small as it may be. There's no limitation for him. This is too small for him. Over here, he can't fit. He's infinite, and therefore he can contract himself into anything. And what counts is, as I explained in the last year, is one question. Is this what he chose to put himself into? If this is what he chose to put himself into, that's where you'll find him. If he didn't choose to put himself into this, as worthy as it may be, you're not going to connect with him through it. You can do something unbelievable that's going to put the whole world, excite the whole world. But if it's not Hashem's will, it's not Hashem. If it's not Hashem's wisdom, it's not him. So if it's a part of the Torah is Hashem's wisdom, and when you study it, you're connecting with the essence of Hashem. If it's a mitzvah, then when you perform it, you're connecting with the essence of Hashem. But if the mitzvah is not done in accordance with Hashem's will, let's say you put up a mezuzah, but the mezuzah, instead of being written on parchment, is written on paper. So it's very impressive. It's beautiful penmanship, beautiful calligraphy, but it's not Hashem's will. If it's not Hashem's will, it's not a mitzvah. It doesn't connect you with Hashem. Hashem is not present in that act. He didn't put himself in there.
Excuse me, but you said that when Hashem said that thou shalt not kill, etc., we're looking at it here. For Israel there, it was a big thing because the world around them did kill, did dishonor, did all the things we were now being told not to do. So for us at the time, it was a big thing.
Okay, good point. However, first of all, the Torah is eternal. And being the Torah is eternal, so if it's meant to be wow, then the wow should be today as well. And if the wow is not today, then it's a limited wow then also. And the point that I'm trying to make is what is really special about commandments is not the fact that they're mind-boggling, brilliant new ideas, innovative ideas, but rather the fact that they're the will of Hashem. And the will of Hashem, whether it's in the simplest thing or the most complicated thing, what counts is it's the will of Hashem. That's what Hashem chose to contract himself into, to concentrate himself into. And therefore, when you fulfill that act, which is the will of Hashem, you're connecting with Hashem's infinity. And when you don't fulfill an act which is the will of Hashem, as meaningful as it may be and as impressive as it may be, it doesn't connect you with the essence of Hashem. And this is the point that we made at the turn of the page, when we said that although the garments of thought, speech, and deed are only the garments of the soul, the feelings and the understanding of the soul are much more impressive. But nevertheless, the acts of mitzvahs and the study of Torah is infinitely greater than the greatest emotional experience. Because the emotional experience is your emotion. You're a finite being. The Torah is the will of Hashem, the wisdom of Hashem, and Hashem is infinite. So his infinity is contained within the Torah, within the mitzvahs. So if you want to connect with the infinity of Hashem, the only way to do so is through Torah and mitzvah. Is that? Yes.
So, obviously, a man would have to do that all the time.
We all do it all the time because there are mitzvahs that we do specific. We're doing a mitzvah, and then there's also the commandment of know him in all your ways, and all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. So when we are engaging in ordinary activity, but the purpose of the ordinary activity is to enable us to be able to serve Hashem, then we're also serving Hashem. So if I'm looking after my health in order I should be healthy to be able to serve Hashem, to be able to study His Torah, perform His mitzvahs. If I'm eating in order to have the strength to be able to study Hashem's Torah, perform His mitzvahs, and serve Him. If I'm exercising in order to be in good condition to be able to, if I'm shopping in order to have the wherewithal, things that I need to be able to serve Hashem. If I'm cooking in honor of Shabbos, in order that people should be able to eat food and be able to be healthy and serve Hashem, these are all part of the service of Hashem because you're fulfilling the mitzvah of know Him in all your ways, and all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. So one way or another, if we're living a Torah life, and it's fully encompassed in a Torah life, we're continuously serving Hashem. So I'm going to start from the words v'tzimtzim, which is the last word in the 6th line from the top of the page. On page 16, the 6th line, the last word is v'tzimtzim. V'tzimtzim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ritzeinu v'chachmasei, the Almighty contracted, which means concentrated, and eingekvetcht, His infinite will and His infinite wisdom. V'taryag mitzvahs HaTorah v'ilcheseim, in the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah, and in their halachas. 613 mitzvahs, and each one of the mitzvahs has many laws, that the details of the requirements of that mitzvah. And that's when it comes to the oral law, where the concept is Torah. But when it comes to the written law, not only is the concept Torah, but even the words are Torah. Tanakh is Torah, Nevi'im, Eksuvim. The combination of letters of the Tanakh, of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and the scriptures. And their explanations that are brought in the various books of Agadah, and the Medrashim of our sages of blessed memory. And why did the Almighty take His infinite essence and contract it into these finite concepts that we could comprehend? It's bichdei shekol haneshama. It's in order that every neshama, a ruach, the nefesh, or even the lower levels of ruach, which is spirit, nefesh, the soul, and we explained many times that neshama is primarily connected with an intellectual connection. Ruach is more an emotional connection, and nefesh is more a practical connection. Shebeguf ha'adam, which are invested in the body of man, tuchal hasigan b'daita, should be able to comprehend these concepts in its mind, ulakaimon, and fulfill of them, kol masha efshel l'kaimehem, whatever can be fulfilled of them, the ma'aseh dibur machshava, in one's actions, one's speech, and one's thought. In other words, Hashem wanted to have a relationship with us. He wanted that we should have a relationship with Him. So if He remained in His infinite state and we remained finite, and there was no interlocking aspect between the two, He would remain in His world of infinity. We would remain in our world of finitude, and there would be no connection. So Hashem contracted Himself, concentrated Himself into finite concepts of the Torah and finite actions of mitzvahs, in order that we, both on an intellectual level, an emotional level, and on a practical level, should be able to engage with Him and interact with Him and become connected with Him. And as a result of this, the soul can invest itself with all its 10 faculties, the intellectual faculties, the emotional faculties, can all be invested in these 3 garments of thought, speech, and deed, and through them connect to the essence of Hashem. Then the Alter Rebbe continues, and therefore that's the reason why Torah is compared to water. What's the analogy of water? Just like water descends from a lofty place, from a high place to a low place. Right? The water comes trickling down the mountain, comes from a high place to a low place. The nature of water is that it always goes to the lowest possible place. If you have a leak, it's going to come down. Yeah? So just like water goes from a high place to a low place, so the Torah descended from its place of glory, which is the will and the wisdom of Hashem, where the Almighty and His Torah are absolutely one. The less machshava tvisa beklal, and no thought can grasp Him whatsoever, because the way Hashem is in His lofty place, He is absolutely infinite, and our limited thought, our limited comprehension cannot interact with Him, cannot grasp Him. It's not only our thought cannot grasp Him, no thought can grasp Him. Because the whole concept of grasping is just like physically, if you grasp something, you're holding it by its ends. So when you grasp something with your mind, you're also holding it by its ends, by its perimeters. In other words, you can only understand what something is if you can work out in your mind what it's not. Right? If you don't work out what something is not, you can't work out what it is. You have to know what its boundaries are. To grasp something, you have to get. If I tell you, I'm gonna tell you an emotion. I'm gonna tell you about an emotion. It's not happiness. It's not sadness. It's not love. It's not hate. It's not anger. It's just an emotion. Am I making sense? No. An emotion has to have a description. And a description, by definition, is a definition. Definition comes from the word fin, which in Latin means end. You have to be able to draw perimeters around it in order to communicate, in order to describe it, in order to name it. You cannot have any comprehension of something that has no perimeters. Because to comprehend means to grasp. Grasp means to hold something by its ends, either with your hands or with your mind. But you grasp by getting the limits of something. If something has no limits, it's ingraspable. Just like this table, if I try to grasp it like this, I can't grasp it like this because I'm not grasping it by its ends. If I have an intellectual concept, I want to grasp it, I have to be able to draw lines around it in my mind to be able to grasp it. Here we're talking about Hashem, who is infinite. And because he's infinite, no thought can grasp him. Not only we're not clever enough to grasp him, no thought can grasp him. Even the greatest level of wisdom of the highest world of Atzilus cannot grasp the essence of Hashem because he is infinite. And nevertheless, he's taken that infinite, ingraspable self and has invested it in an equation of the Talmud, which is graspable. Because he is infinite, he can project himself into anything as finite and as limited as it might be, if he chooses to invest himself in. And the same thing is true when it comes to the act of a mitzvah. The act of a mitzvah is the will of Hashem. So he has taken his very infinite essence and invested it in that act. So when you fulfill that act, you're connecting with him. So the Torah has descended from its place of glory, where the Torah and the Almighty are one, and no thought can grasp him whatsoever. And from there it journeyed and descended in hidden levels, from level to level, through the chain of worlds, until it enclosed itself in physical matters, in matters of this world, which are the majority of Torah, of the mitzvahs of the Torah, the vast majority, just about all the mitzvahs of the Torah, involve physical action, and their laws, as well as in the physical combination of letters, ink on parchment. The Sefer Torah has words that are written with ink on parchment, and those words are Torah, and Hashem's infinite essence is enclosed in them. Estrim Barbas, the 24 books of the Bible, meaning the Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, the books of the prophets, and the books of the scriptures, which altogether make 24 books. And why did Hashem invest himself in them? That every thought should be able to grasp it. That every person's thought should be able to, with his thought, have a relationship with Hashem, grasp Torah. Now, Philip is dibur and even speech and deed, that are lower than the level of thought, can grasp them and enclose itself in them. Now, we said that the Torah is compared to water. Just like water goes from a high place to a low place, so the Torah journeyed from its place of glory, where it's one with the infinite essence of Hashem, and it's come down into a packaging where each and every one of us can comprehend it and can interact with it. Why choose water more than, let's say, light? Light, if you stand at the top of a mountain with a spotlight, the light will also travel from high to low. Why only water? The answer is because light, for example, as it goes further from the luminary, it diminishes. It becomes less, very slowly. And if you go far enough, it becomes dark. So it's very, very slowly diminishing from place to place. It doesn't come down in its entire intensity from the high place to the low place. While water, when it comes down from a high place to a low place, the entire intensity of the water, as it was in the high place, comes down to the low place. It doesn't diminish on its journey. It doesn't become any less. It doesn't become. It's at no point no longer the real thing. So the muscle that we use for Torah is specifically water, because the Torah, as we learn it here on earth, in a way that a human being's mind can comprehend it, and the human mouth can say the words of Torah Shebiksav, That is the real thing. That is the Torah exactly as it is, one with Hashem. It has not been in any way diminished. It's not been in any way watered down. It's not been in any way less the essence of the Torah, the way it is, in the way it's contained in our accessible reach, is no less the true Torah than the way it is in its source. It's the real thing. That's the amazing thing of the Almighty's infinity, that He's capable of taking His infinite wisdom and packaging it in such a manner that we should be able to grasp it, and nevertheless it doesn't lose any of its authenticity. It remains the infinite wisdom of Hashem, even in its finite package. Once the Torah and its mitzvahs enclose the 10 faculties of the soul, meaning the person's intellect is invested in Torah, the person's emotions are invested in fulfilling mitzvahs passionately. And all the 613 organs or limbs of the soul, from head to toe, are all invested in Torah and mitzvahs. Then the entire soul is bound with a bond of life with the Almighty Himself in the most real way. And the light of Hashem is encompassing it and enclothing it from head to toe. As the pasuk says, "Suri, my rock, I will be protected in Him." In other words, just like you wrap yourself up in something as a protector, so we wrap ourselves up in the wisdom and the will of Hashem through engaging in understanding His wisdom and fulfilling His will, and we're completely enwrapped and encompassed by Hashem's will and Hashem's wisdom.
You don't feel it; it just comes to us. You have no...
Okay, so the question over here is, let me just go one more line and then I'll take your question, okay? Well, Ksiv, it says on the top of page test now, which is equivalent to page 18, the bottom. Well, Ksiv, it says in another pasuk, Katsina, like an armor, Ratzain Tatrenu, the will of God encircles us. So just like a person dresses himself in armor, the armor encircles the person, so the will of Hashem in mitzvahs encircles us. Which is a reference to the will and the wisdom of Hashem, that are enclosed in His Torah and His mitzvahs. So when we study Torah, we are encircled and enwrapped by the wisdom of Hashem. When we fulfill a mitzvah, we're encircled and enwrapped by the will of Hashem. Just like an armor encircles and enwraps a person. Now the question was asked, very nice, but we don't feel it. When we study a law in the Talmud or in the Shulchan Aruch or in the Rambam, we are told that this is the infinity of Hashem, the essence of Hashem. If this is the essence of Hashem, why don't we feel it? Why don't we feel different? Why don't we feel special? Right? So there's a famous story that there were once two young maskilim, people that were affected by the Enlightenment movement, came to the Rebbe Rashab. Maskilim were the people that were involved in the Enlightenment movement. Enlightened Jews. They thought that they're very enlightened, very clever. They went to university and they knew it all. So they came to the Rebbe Rashab and they said to him, "Come on, what's this story about angels and spirits and spheres and mitzvahs and Torah? We don't see it all, any of it. We don't feel any of it. We don't understand any of it. How could it be real if we don't do it?" So the Rebbe Rashab said to them, "I'll explain it to you with the following paragraph. So we know in Russia, the Russians are peasants. The intelligentsia comes from France. The professors get imported from France. From France. Yeah. So there were once two French professors that came to Russia, and they were traveling from one town to another to deliver a paper, a deep philosophical paper at the convention that they were going to. Now, how did they get from one town to the next? They went by horse and buggy. That's the way they traveled. Now, in the horse and buggy, you have three levels. You have the horses, you have the wagon driver, who was a peasant, and you have the French professors, right? Each one has their own perspective of what's going on over here. As far as the horses are concerned, they are convinced that the purpose of this journey is they're going from town A to town B. Why would anybody want to go gallop from town A to town B? So they figured it was very simple. There's probably no hay, no animal feed left in town A. So they have to go to town B because over there's hay. And their theory is proven correct. When they arrive in town B, the wagon driver takes them to the stable behind the tavern, and he gives them hay. So they know their theory was correct. It was proven. Yeah. The wagon driver, he's much cleverer than the horses. He knows that in town A there's also hay. That's not the purpose of the journey, silly horses. The purpose of the journey is that when you arrive at your destination, the wagon driver gets his fee, and then he's able to go into the tavern and have some vodka. So now that's talking. The purpose of the trip is that the wagon driver should get his fee, go into the tavern, and have his vodka. We know what the real purpose is. Not the silly horses think it's about hay. It's not about hay. It's about something much more sophisticated, right? Then you have the Frenchmen that are sitting in the back of the carriage, and they, from their perspective, the purpose of this journey is to deliver this phenomenal paper that they're going to wow everybody with their paper. That's the purpose of the journey, right? So the Rebbe Rashab turned to these two young men and he said to them, tell me, because the horse thinks hay, therefore the Frenchmen aren't Frenchmen? Does that dictate reality? Does your perspective, does the horse's perspective of reality dictate reality? Reality is what reality is, independent of whether the horse gets it or not, right? So when we study Torah, and when we fulfill a mitzvah, the reality is that we're having an interaction now and a fusion with the infinite essence of Hashem in the most remarkable way. It's the most phenomenal thing that exists. The fact that we do feel it or we don't feel it is completely irrelevant in defining what's actually happening. I might be a horse, I might be a wagon driver, I might be a Frenchman, but neither of those defines true reality. True reality is what reality is. And what reality is, we learned just now. A Yid learns Torah, a Yid fulfills a mitzvah, he's having a connection with the infinite essence of Hashem. So we'll hold it over here. And just to mention that this weekend, as probably everybody knows, is the Shluchos convention. So I'm sure that there'll be a very, very inspiring program on Sunday. The banquet is aired online, Chabad.org. So anybody who's looking for a really inspiring experience should try to find a way of connecting with. It's aired live, and I'm sure you'll find it very inspiring. Shluchos, the wives of the Shluchos, are having a convention in New York in honor of the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka's yahrzeit. This is coming Monday. Just the women. Just the women. Every year, the Shabbos nearest the yahrzeit of the Rebbetzin is the Shluchos convention, and there'll be thousands of Shluchos from every continent across the world coming together, and there'll be various programs beginning probably tomorrow, lasting till Monday, of all different types, but of all different interests. And on Sunday, there'll be a banquet, which is the main event, and that is open to. It's recorded and it's photographed, so it's available online. You can watch it live online. There's a program. There's a program. Last year, someone from Golders Green spoke, Mrs. Hushman, who attended this Shiur many years ago. Now she comes to the Hebrew Shiur, and was first introduced to authentic Yiddishkeit at this Shiur. And she told over at the banquet about her experiences at this Shiur.
Wow. Who was that?
Mrs. Ushman, Michal, the author of What Would You Do If You Weren't Afraid?
If you weren't
Afraid.
Oh.
She wrote a book, What Would You Do If You Weren't Afraid?